All right, it's 12 noon. We'll call the meeting to order for I'm sorry, I gotta put my glasses on. For Thursday, February the 9th, 2023. So call to the order. Do we have any additions to the agenda at the moment? No? Okay. Move to adopt the agenda. I need a motion to do that. Okay, seconded. Seconders by Kirk, is it? Okay. Minutes from the previous meeting. If you've had a chance to review them, I've reviewed mine. So do we need a motion to approve the minutes?
Shouldn't I have to say the motion for the adoption of the agenda? Should. Okay.
Yes, you should. Yes. Okay. Sorry.
I move that the Municipal Planning Commission adopt the agenda for the February 9th, 2023 regular meeting as presented.
All those in favor? Okay. So we'll carry on from the minutes of the previous meetings. So if we've had an opportunity to review them and accept them, then I need a motion to adopt them.
Tony?
Okay, Tony?
I move that the Municipal Planning Commission adopt the minutes for the January 11, 2023 Municipal Planning Commission meeting as presented.
Seconded. Oh, it was on. It just went away, did it? Okay. So next thing up is all those in favor of the adopting the minutes. Aye. Okay. Tony did the motion.
Tony did the motion.
So development permits as attached, which I don't. Oh, yes, I do have a copy. Okay, need a motion to accept the development permits for information only.
That one. I move to accept the development permits for information only.
Okay, seconder, Kurt. Thank you. All in favor? Adopted. Okay. And item number 6, land use bylaw. So we're into the development. Consolidate the second reading. So we're into daily business, right? At this point. So we've got that. Palliser. Devin, did you have something is he here?
Tracy's here in Devin's absence today.
Okay. So is this just information only, letters of credit? No, on the Palliser municipal services. I don't think that we need anything for the development permit, do we? Or the development land use bylaw?
Unless there's any discussion from anyone. So this hasn't changed since second reading from council. Okay. So it's just an information piece right now. It will be discussed at the open house this evening at the BCF between 6 and 8. If any members of the public have any further questions. But like I said, it's just information only right now until it's passed through third reading.
I read it through and I didn't even spot a typo in the thing. That's really good.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for that. And onwards and upwards to Palliser Regional Municipal Services, letters of credit, damage deposits for relocated buildings. There's a question here. Why can these no longer be conditions for development permits? Is there a discussion around this that we need to have, or?
There is, so that's why Tracy's here.
Okay.
So Tracy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Tracy, are you there?
Hi there.
Okay, so Tracy, you're up with respect to the letters of credit and damage deposits, etc.
Great, thank you. Nice to meet everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm the senior planner for Palliser, and Devin did ask that I could attend today. He's not available. So from what I can understand is that I've been asked to come speak to why conditions, or what are appropriate conditions to put on a development permit. So the Municipal Government Act says kind of what you can do in a land use bylaw and what you can do when you're issuing a development permit. And so there's certain reasons why a development authority, so the MPC is a development authority, there's certain reasons why you can ask for money from a developer as a condition of a development permit. And in that, the Municipal Government Act says if you're going to ask for money, it must be agreed to in a development agreement. So that's the first clause that we need to be aware of. And then the MGA sets out what you can ask money for in a development agreement. So you can ask for money for things like payment of an offsite levy, payment of, and I should have had this open, sorry, but you can ask for payment of securities, that for any construction of any municipal infrastructure, and you can also ask them to construct any municipal infrastructure, or to pay you to construct that. So asking for a deposit for any other reason cannot be done as a condition of a development permit under the Act. There are some municipalities, for example, that do ask for money in different ways, not through the land use bylaw. So, but for example, if you're doing a development and you are going to be connecting to municipal water and sewer, so that means you're going to be digging up the road, they will ask, they'll create a separate council policy for example, a road permit or an excavation permit. And so you pay money to get that permit, and then that permit requires you to then put a damage deposit down for reconstruction of the road to the municipal standard. So there are other ways of asking for money for deposits, but it's not through the land use bylaw or as a condition of a development permit issuance.
So I have a question. I'm not sure, how did this arise in the first place? What is this circulating around? Is there some issue?
So there's not an issue per se. We have a number of so this was in the old land use bylaw, and there are a number of properties that had this taken on them, that the money's sort of been held by the municipality and hasn't been given back. So this was no, was that?
Sorry, oh, now that I've hummed. So it's actually, there's two different pieces. So Antonia's correct to a degree. The town, let's say it was all town, took development permits. Actually, some of it was city still. Took money as deposit, usually development agreement related. So it was part of an agreement where there was a good example is Extra Foods. When they constructed their store, there was a development agreement that they had to do certain things regarding landscaping and other pieces, of which there was a deposit held in trust for that, and was released as the work was completed or once it was completed satisfactorily. Raptor Ridge, there's a development agreement in place that the trees, they had to plant trees, and the trees had to live for a minimum of a couple of years, of which there's a deposit on record for something like that. So most of them were related to the construction of some service. So a number of the ones that Antonia talks about are related to driveway approaches. So they basically cut the curb and constructed an approach of which there was a deposit to make sure that the work was done properly and professionally. And then if it was, after the inspection period was over, it should have been returned. And there are a number that had not been, have kind of fallen by the wayside for whatever reason. That's different than we have also had, as Antonio points out, in the old land use bylaws, in the one from 08, there was a provision for deposits in there to ensure that and it was specifically, if I recall, related to mobile homes or RTMs, was a way to ensure that the home was moved on the property correctly, and that it was landscaped at the completion of it. So in my recollection, which is good, there are two that we have done. One was probably in 15 or 16, of which The money was returned in 19 or 20. And it was basically an RTM moved onto a site in Newcastle. A deposit of $10,000 was taken. Half of it was returned because there were significant deficiencies with the property that weren't rectified until, like I said, 19 or 20. The second one was one that MPC had asked to have put on in around 19 or 20 for RTM that was moved onto a property in Cambria. And basically as a way to ensure that the home wasn't just dumped on the property. So there was a deposit taken with the intent that, and the deposit was actually $20,000 with the intent that it would spur the developer to actually finish doing the work. And then there would be a nice house for someone to live in and everything. And that one, to my knowledge, we have not returned a cent of that because the money because they have not completed the work they needed to do. They don't even have all of the services attached to it yet. So I guess that's where we come from, Tracy, or our side of it is that while I understand and appreciate the MGA, is like, what tool does a municipality have to ensure that someone doesn't come and just move a 1963 trailer on a site, never finish it, and then basically walks away from it, that we have to ensure that they do the work properly?
Yeah, that's a great question. With any development in the town, the tool that you have is by law. Well, first off, it's issuing your development permit. So putting conditions on the permit that you can enforce. So you can put conditions on a permit, well, as long as it's in your land use bylaw. So if it's a permitted use, you need to have conditions written into your land use bylaw that you can put on a condition. So for example, for a manufactured home, if it's a permitted use, if you put regulations in the bylaw that they need to meet, so for example, a certain design style, a certain minimum width, a certain height, that you can put into your land use bylaw. And then you put that as a condition of a permit. If it's a discretionary use in that district, when you're issuing the permit, you have more ability to put conditions on that permit. It doesn't need to be specifically listed in the land use bylaw. And so when you go to issue that permit, make sure your conditions are there and put timelines on your permit. You can always put dates where things need to be completed by. Then if those conditions aren't met, you go into the enforcement stage. And so by enforcement, I mean, you can issue stop orders, you can issue fines, or you can do both. And those are the tools that are granted to us through the MGA for things like this. The MGA does not allow for taking of deposits for completion of a development related to aesthetics. Specifically in the MGA, landscaping is something that is listed. There are sometimes questions around it because landscaping in this sense isn't defined. So most things that you're allowed to take money for in a development agreement under the MGA are on public lands. So it relates to roads, utilities. Landscaping is something that people have taken to apply to both on-site and off-site. And it has not been challenged in court, I would say. So you are on-site taking a deposit for completing landscaping, as Mr. Katz mentioned. Does that help?
I just got a question, Tracy, and it's in regards to Daryl's last example, is where we seem to have our issues here. So are you saying we could tie a deposit to a building permit, but not a development permit?
No, that's incorrect. So a building permit is something that's issued under the Alberta Safety Codes Act, and so the building is one of those components. A municipality can't ask for deposits under the building code because that's a provincial legislation. So the Municipal Planning Commission cannot issue conditions, and it will never deal with a building permit. A municipality can deal with conditions at development permit only. And your conditions of the permit can relate specifically to things that are planning related that are in your land use bylaw.
Yeah, but I guess it doesn't motivate the developer to follow through on why the original development permit was issued. Yes, you can put in fines and stuff, but like I say, if a $20,000 deposit isn't a motivator, I don't think $100, $200 fine for a bylaw infraction is going to carry anything worse. I guess you move it in 16 and 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, it's still sitting there. It's like without a deposit, what is the financial motivator?
Same for any development. It doesn't matter whether it's a building being moved on a property or a building being constructed on the property. The motivation is that you get a development permit and you get it done. And there are many cases where sometimes people don't get things done. So it doesn't matter the type of development. The point is that the municipality isn't allowed to take money for that completion of the building. Landscaping, yes. The building, no. As long as that landscaping deposit, you need to kind of have a policy around that. So some municipalities, for example, will have an engineering standards guideline that talks about landscaping, or you put that into your land use bylaw. So the motivation to finish is you have a completion date. If you don't, yes, you can get fines or a stop order. A stop order is very effective. And so those are the tools that you've been given. I would say, in speaking with many developers, the struggle that they have with municipalities taking money is that if you're taking their cash, you're actually taking the money that they would have available to finish those repairs. So if they give you $20,000, they don't have $20,000 to then do the work. And in some municipalities, the work may be $1 million. And if you're asking for $1 million of security, that's $1 million that they don't have to actually complete that work. So I think that's why it's set up that way in the Municipal Government Act, to not give you the authority to take money from developers. They do need that money available to do work.
Go ahead, Art.
And I just see that leaving a municipality with $1 million headache. But when you were talking about things that we could take deposits for, you mentioned something about a construction permit. What's to stop us from taking deposits as construction permits instead of development permits?
So municipalities can separately, like a council, could come up with, so for example, and this would be an excavation permit. So in some municipalities, when you do a water and sewer connection, let's just say you're building a house only, and you're building a service line, and let's say there is no, like typically with a water main, there'll be a service line to property line, right? And you'll have a stub inside your property line. In some
I
cases,
understand all that.
yeah, so in some cases, that service line will need to be replaced back to the main, right? And so you're digging into municipal property rather than going the way of a development agreement, because a development agreement is a lot of work. They're not simple documents to prepare, to execute. Typically requires legal review. It requires that person to go out and see a lawyer to, if they don't have a company seal in Alberta, you need to then go to a lawyer and have the document notarized. So you're asking a person to do a lot of work to get a development agreement signed for potentially a $5,000 deposit. It's going to cost them $1,000 in legal fees on top. So some municipalities will say, okay, if it's a $5,000 deposit only, rather than signing a development agreement, we're going to have a separate policy that says if you're digging in our road to replace a single service line, and let's say if the municipality had to go in and do the work afterwards, it's only a $5,000 fee. They'll take that $5,000 as a deposit specifically for work that is only being done on municipal property, not on private property. The only way you can ask for money on a private property is through the MGA.
So the MGA is totally tying our hands in managing development, or like somebody wants to bring a 1920s house into the town and throw it on a lot. not skirt it off, not finish it off, just leave it there and walk away, and we're helpless. Is that what
Nope,
I'm hearing?
you're not helpless at all. Actually, quite the opposite. So all I'm saying is you can't take money to enforce what you're gonna put as a condition of a permit. So if your land use bylaw says you can't have a trailer that's, for example, older than 10 years, the permit gets refused.
Yeah, yeah,
If your
I
land use,
understand all that, but I tell you, I came from a municipality where we had something around 20 lots where the developer made a promise to develop on all of them and bought all the lots from the town and then didn't build on them. And 10 years later, he's still thumbing his nose at the town and there's not a dang thing they can do.
so you're saying he bought the land from the town, it's still being vacant land?
Yeah, they were building lots, all serviced and ready to go. He bought
Yeah.
them with a promise to build on them. The town didn't take a deposit from him on, to a promise to get those back. They said they'd get the lots back, they'd buy them back from him at some point in time, and he didn't sell them back, and they got stuck with them. And now they're dealing with half their new development is empty. It's kind of hard to sell the others.
Yeah, so that would be a completely separate issue. That's a real estate transaction, not a development. So anyone can purchase land freely or sell land freely to another person. Um,
Well, the
typically, when a
point I'm trying to make is without some kind of um, a fairly hefty financial incentive, a lot of these guys, they just don't care. They don't care if they bring in some old house and dump it on a lot here. They burn the guy who owns the lot. They burn the guy they got the house from, and they burn the town. They got their money and they left.
Yeah, so I do hear what you're saying. I do think there's a number of different issues that you're dealing with here. So real estate transactions are very different from development itself. And so the municipality in preparing offers to sale of their land can put stipulations in a real estate transaction about when a property needs to develop, which is separate from issues of a land use bylaw and what can be put on each property and the municipality issuing conditions of approval,
Yeah,
which is again separate from taking deposits on
yeah,
something.
I quite understand all of that. I'm just confused as to what protection the municipality has, because as Tony, as one of the other mentioned here, there's no real incentive if they don't have some money in the game.
I think to add to Art's point, Tracy, and is that the challenge we have is, so you talk about a stop work order as kind of this great panacea to protect the municipality. We've issued stop work orders in the past that basically have been ignored, and then all it is it's the grade 5, it's your grade 5 teacher waving their finger at you, please don't do this again. No, I really mean it this time. No, this time I'm really serious, don't do it again. But the reality is that there is no, and then, to Art and Tony's point, you provide a fine to them, you provide another fine, like we've done a couple of these things where they've literally been tied up for 18 months in court because, and it ends up costing the town far more money, because, as Art points, they basically thumb their nose. So while we understand and we know we can't change anything, especially during this meeting, and appreciate your information, I think the reality is that you live in a different world than we do with respect to the actual boots on the ground, people looking at stuff that comes into the municipality, that these folks at the MPC table have to understand how they're going to make it work while not making our LUB restrictive, which we've done the opposite and make it very flexible. It's also now possibly causing us more issues because there are less tools for us to be able to handle the eccentricities of individuals who look at bringing in substandard housing. And to be clear, I'm going to say we have almost zero problems with stick-built homes in the community. this is, really the deposits have only ever been issued for people who bring in RTMs in. And it's usually because, and it didn't matter if the RTM was a one year old or 10 years old or 20 years old. It was usually the people who bring it in, get dumped, and then they don't follow through with the things, which I agree with why would I spend money to bring a place into a lot I own and not try to get someone in there to live in it right away? But some people don't agree with that philosophy. So I think, I'm kind of adding a bit onto Art's comment there, so.
Yeah, and I definitely hear, I mean, I have been a development officer for 15 years. I've issued a lot of permits. I've done a lot of bylaw enforcement, and I don't always think that taking money is the best solution. In my opinion, having a solid land use bylaw, and if this is the issue, relocated buildings, have them as discretionary uses, and specifically make the Municipal Planning Commission the approval authority for any building to be relocated into Drumheller. Have tougher standards on what you require those buildings to look like. And if they don't meet that, then you refuse them.
And I would, just going through the LUB for dwelling unit manufactured, it just says visual interests such as, it doesn't say it's mandatory, it just means these are the visual assets that you could do. But maybe there does need to be a mandatory,
So they're currently, we're looking at the proposed,
proposed,
changes
sorry,
here.
yes.
They are a discretionary use, so if they were to come to MPC and we looked at those and said, no, this doesn't fit what the vision is, then you have the leg to stand on to refuse that. Is that right, Tracy?
Yes, you do. A discretionary use can be refused for any reason as long as you have a good reason and you put that reason into the permit, or like into the decision of the permit. Somebody could appeal that, but the flip side is that if you put in a deposit amount, if you allow something that's what you think is substandard and someone says, oh, I'm gonna upgrade that, and you take money on it as a condition of a permit, they can turn around, go to your SDAB and say, you can't legally do this to me. The SDAB will then strike the condition of the deposit, and they will move forward with the substandard building with no assurance that it will be done, right? So you're better off keeping to the act, not because the SDAB will have to strike that condition. They can't keep it. But having solid conditions for the appearance of the building that you're approving.
Just one more comment. We had a building moved into the community I came from, and it had vertical siding on it, and all the other buildings around had horizontal siding, and that's all we required of them, was to change the blooming siding. And it was a 3-year fight, all because they didn't care, and we had no way to.
Anyway, I think that, so I know our infrastructure director is working on a policy for excavations and any cuts into pavement, because that is one of the things that's missing from us as of right now. So, and I think we've heard loud and clear about the deposits. Again, it's been very infrequent. Like in 7 years, there's only been 2 that I know of, and they were both RTMs. And the reality is, they were both challenging individuals that were well known in the community that provided substandard housing to begin with. So but the challenge is you can't refuse them based on how they look or feel, right? And so that was where and it's funny because, like I said, one of them has not been returned yet because that person has not finished the work that was started 4 years ago. And so it's a shame because it's a house that could be lived in the community, and is still sitting somewhere in between. And I think some of this, honestly, Tracy, goes back to where we think about it from a contract standpoint. So as a good example, we're doing a bunch of construction in town. There's holdbacks on construction or deposits on construction all the time. all taken on the event that the contractor stops doing what they're supposed to do or what they've agreed to do. And you take the money and use it to be able to finish the work to the satisfaction of the approving authority, right? So that's really where I think our origin of it came from. The fact that it's been pointed out, we can't do it through the MGA, that's fine. We won't be doing that, but yeah, and that's why it's not in the current land use bylaw either, so.
Mhm. Yeah, so you're definitely allowed to spend that money when it's taken with regards to anything that's in the MGA through the development agreement. So unfinished concrete on the sidewalk, landscaping, that's when you can spend that money. And like you said,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Is there not a way to address, how's that actually done? For instance, if you're gonna develop a piece of property, you get a development permit, and you come to the building department with your plans to get a building permit. And you've gotta tie into the services in the center of the street. I would expect that that's your responsibility to tie into that, is it not?
So, yeah, it's
Well, the developer being me, for
It's
instance, if
the
I'm gonna do
developer's
that.
responsibility, and we do have, Daryl, correct me if I'm wrong, we have policies in place that say if you can connect to servicing, then you must connect to servicing. So my house, for example, can connect to the water and sewer, therefore I cannot put a holding tank in, for example. Is that what?
Well, if there's no services to connect to, but there is an existing set of lots, how do you connect to a service when there's no service there?
So if they're close to servicing, then have the developer put the services in. So there are a couple of places that aren't serviced right now that could be, but then looking at, say, East Cooley, for example, where there's not the water line there,
Yeah,
having the potable water service wouldn't be a requirement, but if they can connect to the sewer, which they, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Daryl, they can do, then they must do.
okay. And so when I dig my trench for my utilities to come from the street, who's responsible for digging the trench? I am.
You
right?
are, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm digging on the town's property, so what recourse does the town have against me when I dig that trench and they don't like the way I did the asphalt? I put pink asphalt in instead of black.
So normally it's inspected before it's backfilled, and then as it's backfilled, so the
Yeah.
town inspects it. But right now there is no deposit taken, and that's what our infrastructure director is actually trying to correct, is bring a policy for the council to basically charge for that. And it's not so much about the fact you did the work now, it's about the fact that it's settled next year because it wasn't compacted properly. You thought it was compacted fine, it looked okay, but it actually settles, and now we have to go in and repair it, right? So that's really what the deposit for the work on public property is about, so.
So is it a physical deposit that the town takes, or is it a performance bond?
It could be letter of credit, check, or a bond, yeah.
Okay.
Normally, most individuals aren't doing a bond, but they're doing one or the other, like a check or like a certified check or a letter of credit. But it could be anything that's a performance security.
That we can't put as a condition of the development. That goes through a completely separate.
But you can't put it as a condition of the development permit, but you sure can put it as a condition of the building permit.
So you can, so that's what I was saying, under the MGA, for construction of utilities in a municipal road, you can make it as a condition of a development permit, specifically state to enter into a development agreement for the construction of municipal utilities. Then you prepare a development agreement, and a development agreement is that complex legal document. And then you state in there that you're going to take a deposit, a security of a certain amount. And your development agreement should specify how you calculate that security. And then you have that development agreement executed. So this is a perfect example of where you can use a development agreement. However, if you're only taking a deposit for $5,000, let's say, a development agreement is a big process to do for a small deposit. a development agreement is really a good tool if your deposit's going to be, let's say, $20,000, $50,000 or more. If it's just putting in a single connection line, a service line to a single property, you're probably better off going the way that you've proposed here, is having a public works policy and a permit for excavation for that single line. And then you don't have to go through that whole development agreement process.
So
Does
I have
that make sense?
so I have a standalone lot that sits down at the end of a road somewhere, and the nearest water development is, I don't know, for the sake of the argument, 400 feet from me. Um, if I have to tie into the service and extend the service from the town's services, does the town extend the services and I pay for them, or do I extend the services and pay for them at the same time? How does that work?
I think that that's where there's a negotiation, because if there's an opportunity for us to share because there's other development potential, then maybe that's where the town does extend it to your property. So the intent of what Tony said, so that you must connect to this town services if available. So if available means that it's touching at least one corner of your property, right? Or adjacent to one corner of your property. So if you're having to bring it a distance just to get to your property, that's not a requirement that you have to connect. However, if there's an ability for us to say, oh, well, if we can connect to your property, but it also gives the other people across the road the opportunity to connect, then there's a number of tools that are available, like a local improvements, bylaw, or perhaps just cost sharing to provide that servicing, so.
Anyway, so it's not actually attached to a building permit then?
No,
No,
No.
we can't do conditions on building permit. It's purely through the safety plan officer and their.
So you have, do we have, wow, I hope, does the town have no say in what the finished product gets to look like?
So we would either enforce it through, or what's already written in the land use bylaw, or through community standards, or any other bylaw that would be applicable. So we can't issue conditions on a building permit because like we're not even issuing the building permit. That's where the conditions of the development permit come in, which, as Tracy's outlined, can either be already in the land use bylaw or in the MGA, but we can't unfortunately just make them up arbitrarily.
So this new deposit scheme regarding the city property, we would have to create something like a water connection or a utility connection deposit in our bylaws and use that. But if someone was moving some ratty old house into a lot and they were able to just tag on to the water line as it exists on their property and not have to disturb the street, we would have no recourse.
right. It sounds like our only recourse would be at the development permit application stage where we could insist on seeing the condition of the building, photos of the building, and then MPC could make the determination to say, we don't think that pink siding in a vertical form will fit well with this neighborhood of horizontal siding that's all blue, right? And then, but as Tracy points out, you'd have to make sure that you're solid with that argument. I think that solid with the argument piece goes back to, like, personally, I think you would get an appeal probably within an hour if you said you weren't going to allow pink siding that was horizontal in a neighborhood, right? Because that isn't defined anywhere in the bylaw that other than it's very much a, well, shall be similar to the properties that are being built, right? But it's no different than if someone builds a brand new house in Bankview and decides to build it out of exposed or just concrete and not put any siding on it at all. There's no architectural standard that states that you can't do that. So just because it doesn't look like the rest of the buildings doesn't mean it can be denied, right?
If it's a discretionary use, and if you have some sort of standard in your bylaws talking about relocated buildings and the compatibility with adjacent properties, I would suggest you could easily refuse it.
Yeah, it's in the land use bylaw under, the RTM section, but
Mhm.
I actually think that there should be some, like, there needs to be a change in the application process, whereas we have some sort of architectural control or something that can be approved or denied by the MPC or the development authority, especially for that, like tying into infrastructure and everything, fine. I mean, there has to be some sort of, like Daryl outlined it earlier, that's, outlined in the MGA, either a loan or a letter or something like that in order to do that. But I mean, if we're going to be trying to become whole as a municipality and not get burned by developers coming in and just letting stuff sit, then the application process has to be a little bit more defined. And there has to be something put in there to the land use that we can actually enforce. And I think that's kind of just where we're at. Like, we can spitball about different ideas about somebody moving it in or pink siding, but I mean, as a municipality, if we're gonna have everything kind of, well, look good, I mean, we're gonna need to kind of get our ducks in a row before we actually allow these things to go through. We're gonna have to be a little bit more effective in how we approve these things and have the legislation in place before we can do any of it. In the land use bylaw, I guess.
no, good point, Jason.
All right, anything further on this then, or can we move on, or should we move on, or what? Well, we have no authority actually with respect to this anyway, do we?
So it's not that there is no authority. We have the authority to deny the discretionary uses if they don't fit within the rest of the neighborhood. So if we, or for other reasons, so if the MPC decides this application doesn't fit, it's not right, it's for a valid reason, then it can be denied. Or if it's just not a use in that neighborhood anyway, it wouldn't even get to this point. It would just, a permit wouldn't even be applied for.
If we could put in something for like architectural controls or designs or something, put something into play for that, like something into play, if we could work on something like that.
My understanding is we have nothing with respect to landscaping or architectural guidelines, right?
So there's landscaping guidelines, and there is also architectural guidelines for, again, the proposed for RTMs or manufactured homes, which is the predominantly the issue.
Yeah.
So it's not stick built homes that are becoming a concern.
Yeah.
And there are architectural guidelines in some areas. So Green Close,
Yeah, well, there's
Bankview,
covenants
there's
there,
covenants
right?
in those,
Yeah.
so they would need to have to
Yeah.
meet those anyway.
Something you could look at doing too is, in maybe some areas of town, like if you have a manufactured home park district where you want to have lesser standards and you could arrange your districts that you have higher standards in some places and lower standards in other places for manufactured homes. You can devise your land use bylaw to have kind of any effect you want. Just make sure it's clear, easy to implement, easy for people to read and see what those standards are. And then you can enforce them if they're not upheld. But it just helps you in reviewing permits, issuing permits, if the land use bylaw is very clear on those architectural standards.
Okey doke, all right, well, thank you, Tracy. We'll move on. Any other discussion items comes up next? Nothing? All right, next meeting is February 23rd, 2023. Need a motion to adjourn, please. From Art, seconder. From Kirk. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.